Medieval marriage was not like marriage today. People did not marry for love often. They married for other reasons. These reasons were practical, they were about family, land, and money. Society shaped marriage a lot. The church also shaped it, and so did local customs. Marriage was a contract. It was a deal between families. It was not just two people. This was especially true for noble families. A marriage could bring new land. It could secure alliances. It could raise a family status. It was a business decision. It was a political move. For peasants, marriage was also practical. It meant more hands for the farm. It meant children to carry on the work. It meant a household to manage together. The church played a huge role. It saw marriage as a sacrament. It was a holy union. This meant it was permanent. Divorce was very rare. Annulment was the only way out. But annulment was hard to get. It meant the marriage was never valid. This was because of things like close blood ties or not being able to have children. Most people married young. Girls might be 12 or 14. Boys might be a bit older, 14 or 16. But this was just the minimum age. Many waited longer. They waited until they could support a household or until their parents found a good match. For nobles, earlier marriages were common. This was to secure alliances quickly. The idea of individual choice was not big. Your parents arranged most marriages. This was true across all classes, but peasants sometimes had more say. They might pick someone from their village, they knew them, they knew their family. Still, parents had the final word. They wanted someone useful, someone who could work, someone who fit in. Love might grow after marriage. Sometimes it did, but it was not the main goal. The companionship was important. Respect was important. Working together was important. These things built a family, they built a future. It was a different way of thinking about marriage. It was about community, it was about survival, it was about legacy, not just about feelings. And this was the big picture. It was a world where family came first, where tradition ruled, where the church had power, and where a husband and wife had clear, separate jobs. Their roles were set, they knew what was expected, and they usually did it. They worked together to make the household run. This was the foundation of medieval society. The medieval church shaped marriage a lot. It made marriage a sacrament. This meant God blessed the union. It also made it permanent. Before the 12th century, marriage rules were less clear. Local customs had more power. But then the church worked hard to standardize things. Canon law grew stronger. This was church law. It set rules for everyone. The church said marriage needed consent. Both people had to agree. But this consent was sometimes forced, or it was from very young people. So it wasn't always a free choice. A valid marriage meant a man and woman exchanged vows. They said, I do. And they had to mean it. The church emphasized this. It was called consent of the parties. But there were many things that could stop a marriage. These were called impediments. One big one was consanguinity. This meant being related by blood. The church had very strict rules about this. You could not marry someone who was a cousin, even a distant one. This was to prevent incest. It also spread out land and power. Another impediment was affinity. This meant being related by marriage. For example, marrying your deceased wife's sister. The church often forbade this too. Other impediments existed. You could not marry if you were already married. That was bigamy. You could not marry if you had taken religious vows. A monk or a nun could not marry. You also could not marry if one person was a non-Christian. These rules made marriage very specific. They made it a Christian institution. Divorce was almost impossible. The church did not allow it. A marriage was forever, but annulment was an option. This was different from divorce. Annulment meant the marriage was never valid from the start. It was like it never happened. This could be because of an impediment. Maybe the couple was too closely related. Maybe one person was already vowed to God, or maybe one person was impotent. If a marriage was annulled, both people could marry again. But getting an annulment was hard. It needed proof. It needed church courts to agree. It could take a long time. It could cost a lot of money. So it was rare for ordinary people. The actual ceremony changed over time. Early on, it was very informal. A couple might just exchange vows in front of witnesses. This was often at the door of the church, not inside. The priest's role grew over time. He would bless the couple, he would bless the rings. The church wanted weddings to be public. This was to prevent secret marriages. Secret marriages caused many problems. They led to disputes over property and children. So the church pushed for public ceremonies. They wanted the community to know who was married to whom. This made things clear. It set the rules, and this system was powerful. It told people who they could marry. It told them who they couldn't. It told them once married, they were married for life. It shaped families, it shaped property, it shaped society itself. The church's power was not just spiritual. It was also very practical, it governed everyday life, it especially governed who married whom. Getting married in medieval times was a big process. It often started with negotiations. Not between the bride and groom, but between their families. These talks were about land. They were about money, they were about social standing. The families wanted to make the best deal. They wanted to benefit, especially for noble families. This could take a long time. Many letters, many visits, many discussions. The dowry was a key part of this. The bride's family gave a dowry to the groom or his family. This was usually property or money. It was meant to support the bride. It was also meant to make the match more attractive. It was a way to transfer wealth. The amount of the dowry showed a family status. A bigger dowry meant a better match, but the groom's family also gave something. This was the dower. The dower was property set aside for the wife. It was for her support if her husband died. It protected her. It ensured she wouldn't be left with nothing. Once the families agreed, there was a betrothal. This was like an engagement. It was a formal promise to marry. It was a legally binding contract. Sometimes it happened when the couple was very young. They might not even know each other. The betrothal could be as strong as the marriage itself in some ways. Breaking a betrothal was serious. It could lead to lawsuits. The wedding ceremony itself changed. Early in the Middle Ages, it was often simple. A public declaration of vows. This might happen outside the church door, or even in a field. When witnesses were important, they heard the vows, they could confirm the marriage later. There was no need for a priest to be present early on. Over time, the church pushed for church weddings. It wanted priests to officiate. This made the marriage more official. It made it a sacrament. The rings were important. They were a symbol. The groom gave a ring to the bride. This showed his commitment. It showed their bond. And the wedding feast was a big part. Like, it was a celebration. It was a public announcement. Food, drink, music, dancing. It brought the communities together. It showed off the family's wealth. It solidified the alliance. This feast could last for days for nobles. Even peasants had a celebration. It was a moment of joy. But the marriage wasn't fully complete until consummation. This meant the couple had sex. The church saw this as essential. It completed the sacrament. It made the marriage fully valid in God's eyes. If a marriage was never consummated, it could be annulled. This was especially true if one person claimed the other couldn't perform, or wouldn't. This was a private act, but its importance was very public. It was about having children. It was about continuing the family line, and this whole process was carefully managed. It was about order, it was about tradition, it was about making sure society continued. It was not romantic, it was practical, it was essential for medieval life. It set people up for their roles. It started their new life together as husband and wife, but with many strings attached. Many expectations from others. Life inside a medieval marriage was very structured. Gender roles were clear. The husband was the head of the household. He was the main provider. He worked the land, he traded goods, he was responsible for the family's income, he protected his family, he dealt with the outside world. His authority was usually unquestioned. This was the social norm. It was also supported by the church. The wife's role was different. But it was just as important. She managed the household. This was a huge job. She oversaw food preparation. She made sure there was enough food. She preserved food for winter. She made clothing. She cleaned. She managed servants if they had any. For peasant women, she also worked in the fields. She helped with planting and harvesting. She milked cows. She tended gardens. Childbearing was a central duty for the wife. This was seen as God's will. It was also vital for the family's survival. Children meant more workers. They meant the family name continued. They meant someone would inherit the property. Childbirth was dangerous. Many women died during it. Many children died young. So having many children was common. It was a necessity. Power dynamics were usually skewed. The husband had more power. He legally controlled property. He controlled his wife. She was expected to obey him. This was part of the marriage vows, but this didn't mean women were powerless. They often had significant influence within the household. They managed daily life. They controlled household finances. They oversaw their children's education. They were essential to the family's economic well-being. A household couldn't run without a good wife. Affection and companionship could exist. People were not robots. They lived together. They worked together. They raised children together. Bonds often formed. Some letters and stories from the time showed genuine love. But this was not the primary reason for marriage. It was a bonus. A good marriage was one with respect. One with cooperation, one that produced children. Infidelity was a serious matter. For women, it was a huge sin. It could lead to disinheritance, it could lead to social shame. In some places, it could even lead to severe punishment. It put the legitimacy of children into question. For men, infidelity was also a sin, but it was often treated less harshly. Society was much more forgiving of male indiscretion. This was a clear double standard. It showed the different expectations for men and women. Children's roles were also set. Boys learned from their fathers, girls learned from their mothers. They learned the skills they would need for their own marriages. Inheritance rules were usually for the eldest son. This was primogeniture. It kept estates together. Daughters usually received a dowry. This was their share. And this life was very much about duties, about responsibilities. It was about community, it was about the family unit working as one. Each person had a job. Each job was important. It made the system run. It kept people fed. It kept society stable. It was hard work, it was often short, but it was how people lived. It was how they built their lives together. Under very strict rules and expectations. Marriage in the Middle Ages was often for life. But life was short then. So many marriages ended with death. Widowhood was common. For women, being a widow could bring some freedom. A widow might inherit her husband's property. This included her dower. She could manage her own affairs. She could make her own decisions. She might even run a business. But she was also vulnerable. She might be pressured to remarry, especially if she had property or children. Her family often tried to arrange a new match quickly. For men, losing a wife also meant hardship. He lost his household manager. He lost his children's mother. He often remarried quickly. He needed someone to run the house. He needed someone to raise his children. A widower often had more choice in remarriage. He faced less pressure than a widow. Remarriage was frequent, especially for people with property. It was practical. It was about continuing the household. It was about ensuring stability. The church allowed remarriage, but it sometimes discouraged too many marriages, especially for widows. Not everyone married. Some people chose another path. Monastic life was one option. Men could become monks. Women could become nuns. This meant taking vows of celibacy. They dedicated their lives to God. This was often seen as a holy choice. It was a way to avoid marriage. It was a way to gain an education. It was a way to have a different kind of life. For some women, it was an escape from unwanted marriage. It offered intellectual and spiritual fulfillment. But some people lived together outside of marriage. This was concubinage. It was not officially recognized by the church. It was often frowned upon. But it happened. Sometimes a man would keep a concubine. This was more common for wealthy men. She might bear his children, but these children often had fewer legal rights, or they might not inherit. Concubinage was not seen as a proper family unit. It was less stable. It lacked the legal and social protections of marriage. The late medieval period saw some changes. People started to have a bit more personal choice. This was often true in towns. Young people might pick their own partners, they might still need parental approval, but their own feelings began to matter more. This was a slow shift. It was not a sudden change. The church still had strong rules, but society was becoming a bit more complex, more urban, more individual. The legacy of medieval marriage is huge. It shaped how we think about marriage today. The idea of marriage as a permanent union, the importance of consent, even the wedding ceremony itself. Many traditions come from this time, but the reasons for marriage have changed a lot. We value personal choice more now. We value romantic love more. Medieval marriage was a cornerstone of society. It was about survival, it was about stability, it was about ensuring the future of family and land. It was not always easy. It was often hard work. It was a complex system. It bound people together. Not just two people, but entire families, entire communities, and it did so for centuries. It laid the groundwork for everything that came after. It was a system built on necessity, not on romance, but it worked. It kept society going for a very long time.